CJ McCollum calling out the CBA, the way it's structured, and forcing teams to trade away quality players, yet isn't he the guy that helped make it? We're going to dig into the hypocrisy. I'm Trevor Lade. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you subscribe right here to the channel. Joining me is Donnie Freeman. Donnie, the new CBA, it's got, or new-ish, I guess, what, we're 2 years into it?
It's like a couple years in now.
Right, yeah. I don't know if we can call it new anymore. But the CBA, it's got its pros and cons for sure. But CJ McCollum was part of creating this CBA as the president of the Players Union, and yet now he is calling for changes in it. A little bit ironic.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Just real quick, are there actually positives? I couldn't think of one off the top of my head right now.
No positive. Oh yeah, I think definitely. I think the ability to use your mid-level exception as a trade exception. I love that. I think
that is a positive. Okay, because to me it's all negative, but that's a good one. So
no, I like that one. I think there are some other, and we won't do a deep dive into it. But here's what CJ had to say about teams, the way they build rosters, and a very specific complaint that he's got with the current collective bargaining agreement, which once again he was part of the process to create this collective bargaining agreement. Check this out.
You shouldn't be punished for drafting well. Like if you draft well, we've seen some teams be really fortunate in the draft. And now you get to that position Oklahoma City's going through right now where you got to pay a lot of players who are really good and you draft them. You shouldn't be punished for drafting well. You should be able to pay and keep and retain the players that you've drafted. And when you have those windows to where you really have a chance to compete and win a championship, you shouldn't have such severe restrictions. But those are things that, the league and the players union will have to figure out, and there will continue to be a discussion and a dialogue around it. You shouldn't be punished for draft.
So
to clarify on that, he's saying basically when you draft these guys and they get to a certain point, ultimately you wind up having to give them that next contract after a few years.
Yeah.
And you're forced to either decide to keep that player at that increased salary, or you're going to have to make other decisions on your roster and get rid of somebody to make room for that player or get rid of that player. But ultimately, you're not able to keep all these guys despite how well you're drafting because it's just too much with the restrictions of the apron.
So what's the solution could be, and I've seen this proposed before, could be something where if you drafted the player, a portion, I don't think they would do the entirety, but a portion of their salary would not count against the cap. And you could figure out exactly how that would work. And would it be a percentage? Would it be tied to the average player salary or whatever? But if a guy truly hits and becomes a star and you're going to pay him a max, I don't know, let's say they get a $45 million salary, maybe on that $45 million, only $30 million would actually count against the cap, even though the player is actually getting $45 million. So I've seen like solutions like that with people who have said, gosh, a team should get something for drafting well, but there are always going to be unintended consequences. For example, draft picks go way up in value if you do something like that. If you make it easier for teams to keep the players that they've drafted, it also leads to a situation where it's more likely for super teams to continue to become a thing or become a thing once again. I think they have been to a degree legislated out. We'll find out. The Thunder are going to test that. But ironically, CJ McCollum has also historically been very, very anti-super team. This is for a while ago, but this is 2018, Donnie. You pointed this out to me that he was arguing with Kevin Durant about Boogie Cousins going to the Warriors and how it's not fair because he has to play against them.
Yeah. And that is, I think with the super team thing, I've always noticed people are mostly okay with it if it's homegrown. They don't really care if you've drafted all those guys and all that stuff, or if the organization trades for a player here or there. It's typically when it's a player forged one that people are upset about it, and so players decide to team up. Yeah, something like that. But if it's the other alternatives, people don't typically care about that, especially if it's the drafted one, which I can understand why that's the case. But to me, a super team is a super team's a super team, right? But
should there be that distinction? Should it matter whether it's a player-driven super team, like a super team that was set up by players? A bunch of guys play for Team USA, say, hey, wouldn't it be fun to play together? They pick a destination and they all go. Should that be differentiated between that and, hey, a team drafts 4 all-stars back-to-back years and you keep those guys together?
That's just, in my opinion, the last one is just good process. I think if anything, you would lump together trades and player free agency. I think those two can be lumped, but because I never understood why free agents or general managers making trades never really gets factored into it. Like people just are like, oh, okay, well, they traded for that guy. It's okay. But yeah, I don't have a problem with the drafting. If you're able to hit on all those draft picks, you deserve to keep those guys. And if they turn into superstars, they turn into superstars. It is what it is. So,
and there's always going to be the outliers, the Nikola Jokic's that, you get in the second round, and next thing you know, you've got, an all-time generational player. But CJ McCollum, again, years ago, spoke out against super teams, said some players may take this route, but most guys have too much pride. They want to really win on their own or in their certain organizations, and they aren't going to jump the bandwagon. I mean, that's not when they've had the opportunity to do so. We have seen teams do that, or players do that, jump on the bandwagon, go join teams to try to win a championship. That's also not necessarily anything new. And that was, we'll talk about unintended consequences, something that came with the shortening of NBA contract lengths because owners wanted shorter contracts. That created more player mobility. And now we've got opportunities to create super teams like that. I think the new collective bargaining agreement, or newer one, has shifted us away from a super team era. And again, it's funny that CJ McCollum is talking about, man, I wish teams could keep their guys, when he was also the guy who was very anti-super team in the past. But I'll say at a conceptual level, when we step back and we talk about CJ, whether CJ McCollum is part of the conversation or not, the idea of teams keeping their draft picks, on the surface, it sounds good, but it's also the opposite of what the NBA is really going for right now. The NBA is trying for a system where no team stays at the top, no team stays at the bottom for any length of time. They want this constant cycle. And if you look at the last 7 years, we've had a new champion every year. That's certainly been part of that. It's a bigger piece of the parity umbrella that we discuss in this league in terms of how many teams are actually in the mix and fighting for a shot. I think the Indiana Pacers getting to the finals this last year, while the ratings may not have been great as two small market teams with Indiana and OKC, that ultimately is the model that the NBA wants. They want most of the league's fans to feel like their team has a shot to be the team that makes a run and not go into a season already knowing what the finals matchup is going to be, like we saw 4 years in a row with Golden State and Cleveland. But if teams are able to keep those players that they draft, and you can say that's good process, it increases the likelihood of a team getting to the top and staying at the top. And the NBA has set up a system now where they want those teams, hey, if you're going to draft a guy, cool, you can keep that guy, you can keep paying that guy, but you may have to make some difficult decisions in some other spots on your roster that's going to keep you from just having a $300 million salary team or something and keep everybody that you've drafted, and then you just run the league for the next 10 years. They don't want that. Is that inherently a bad thing, Donnie, or should teams be able to, hey, if you draft well, keep those guys and run the league for years and years and years on end?
No, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. But how likely is that, though? Like, for example, the scenario you laid out, how likely is it for a team that has, a couple of superstars to even be able to draft that well in the first place? There are outliers that are going to fall. They're going to be second round guys like Jokic, for example.
OKC
but
just did it.
But more often than not, though, you're not going to get like a super duper good player that you're going to plug in to be a guy that's going to be an immediate contributor to your championship team, or maybe they never turn into anything. Like, that's also on the table too, to play counter to the argument. But I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing for the NBA just in general to want to have instated more parity, because it did get to a point where it's predictable, and as a fan you would never want to see, unless you're a fan of those two teams specifically, a situation where the outcome is mostly predictable based on what you can see on the horizon with the rosters. And that's why I think the NBA has done the things that they've done. They've implemented the play-in tournament. They've done all that stuff. And I think that's made it to where more teams feel like their team or more teams, whether that's fans or like people in charge of these teams, feel like their roster can get them to a point where they're playing in the playoffs. And that's had other adverse effects. Maybe these guys are like Portland, where they feel like they want to go in and they don't want to sell off some of these guys and wait a couple more years. Maybe they want to try to be competitive now because the barrier to entry is so much lower now. They can get in. They can get in and do these things. So that's another adverse effect of all this stuff. And you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I don't know that having the ability, like I could see either side of it, the ability to retain your guys being good and bad, the argument you laid out, but also, are you going to hit on all those guys?
So here's what I think is really functionally what we're going to see play out here. And by the way, I think there's an argument for super teams. There's an argument that having all these stars on one team generates buzz, generates interest. Yeah, I mean, we look at historically, it's the Showtime Lakers, it's Jordan's Bulls, it's the Shaq
and they're not
Kobe
gone for good. We've always had super teams.
We've always
they're going to come back. Like that's
we've always had those teams. But what the system is doing now is it's not necessarily preventing players or preventing teams from keeping all the guys that they draft. No. They're able to keep their top tier guys. Like you look at OKC. OKC doesn't have to lose Chet. OKC doesn't have to lose Jalen Williams. What OKC is going to have to make difficult decisions on is their Alex Caruso's, their Isaiah Hartensteins, their Lou Dorts, players like that is where they're going to have to make the stars they can still keep. It's the peripheral players, because what happens is as players get better, as teams get better, and if you win a championship, those role players are going to start making more. Those guys are going to start, their salaries are going to start going up. And so you have to have that fresh influx of talent in order to replace those guys. And that's where I think draft picks are now more valuable under the current collective bargaining agreement than they've been in the past. But I think to take these guys that you drafted, if you drafted them and say, okay, SGA is going to be on the Thunder, but he's only going to count for 20 million, even though he's getting paid 50, I think that's too big of an advantage. Like if you were going to make that change, you would need a 5-year run up probably to it, because teams would have to adjust their strategies, because the value of draft picks would suddenly go through the roof, and teams would need time to adjust their strategies and figure all that out. And the teams who have traded away a lot of future draft capital would need time to put the brakes on trading away draft picks. There would be a major shift in value around the market too, that I don't know if that's what the NBA really wants. I know on the surface you look at it and go, man, it sucks that we drafted this guy, and now because of that we have to get rid of this other guy here, and I wish we could just keep everybody. And I get that, but I think the alternative, unless there's another way to handle the situation, but the alternative of not making these guys count against the cap as heavily as they would otherwise be if they're a homegrown drafted player, I think that's got some serious unintended consequences. Is there anything else, any other options? And maybe people viewing, let us know in the comment section as well. How else could you allow teams to keep players that you drafted without skyrocketing the value of draft picks?
Yeah. Is that a bad thing if the value of draft picks goes up?
Not necessarily, but
it just means that these guys are going to keep their picks more, and maybe that means there's less movement. But
which, I mean, given the way the NBA very much enjoys a news cycle that involves a lot of trades, a lot of transactions, a lot of activity. I mean, we know it here on the channel. People will tune in to hear about the different transactions and trades and things like that are happening around the NBA. It's something that I think the NBA does better than any other league. The way that they navigate their trade market and everything else. And they definitely enjoy the benefits of that. So I don't think they necessarily want to restrict their trade possibilities either.
But they're also already doing so. But it's still worked out anyway.
Because teams have found a way. Teams have found a way, like Jurassic Park style, life finds a way. Teams have found a way in order to still find moves.
So we're just going to trade with each other to make this work. We're going to, and if we can't do it, we're going to put a third, a fourth, fifth team in. We're going to get it done, man.
Could you imagine? Like, if they've found ways to get this done, to still make moves because they need to. But I just think you would need, there's benefits to doing it, but you would need a long run, because teams would have to significantly change their strategies. If they were going to do that. Well,
that's my thing is, with OKC, because it feels like a lot of this is geared towards OKC.
Sure.
And they are going to have to, at some point, make decisions on their mid-sized guys, the role player guys.
Yeah.
Ultimately, in today's current landscape, you do need to have like a 2 timeline thing going on where you've got young guys waiting in the wings or draft picks to get these young guys to replace the guys you're going to inevitably lose. And you maybe wind up trading some of these guys, making these mid-sized deals because you need to get some assets to do things like that, or get cheaper contracts or shorter contracts, etc. But I just wonder if OKC is the exception, or are they the rule? Like, I feel like they're more of an exception because they had such a long runway of accumulating all of those assets
Right.
prior to this point, and they just so happened to hit on these guys. And it's not really going to impact them now because all these guys are on the quote unquote fun max. But when these guys hit that other one, maybe it would become more of a problem at that point, even with the salary cap going up. That remains to be seen. But, I don't know that many teams are going to be in the OKC position because it would just take so long to get to that point in the first place. That's where I'm kind of like,
Okay, so like Memphis then, right? Des Bane, they got, I believe technically it was via trade, but they got him as a rookie.
Free agent year there?
What's that?
Why does Jackson have a free agent year in the middle of his contract?
I don't know. That's got to be. I bet they didn't know. I bet that's supposed to be where his extension kicks in, and maybe they just didn't know the exact number.
Sorry for cutting you off.
I will not. I'll tell you what. I was going to say I'll let Keith know. I am not going to disturb Keith on his much needed vacation to tell him, hey, you need to look at Jaren Jackson Jr.'s salary for next year. But we know he's not actually a free agent there.
I was going to say, what's happening there?
That would be a crazy contract. Like in the middle of it, you can just become an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That would be I guess it would just be a player option. But anyway, they had John Morant, Jaren Jackson, Des Bane, and they ultimately had to make the decision. Okay, this trio isn't working, and we're going to move on from one of them. And they moved on from Des Bane. I guess to your point, if Des Bane was, instead of 43 million, whatever he's at off the top of my head, if he only counted for 30, if he only counted for 25, but whatever the percentage you wanted to settle on,
they would have kept him.
Are they keeping him? They probably are. And then, but think about teams would suddenly start investing everything into their scouting department. Everything would be on getting those draft picks right. It would be. Yeah, it'd be interesting. See, maybe there's degrees to it. 10% less it counts or something like that.
Whatever change they would do would have to be something cap related, though.
It would have to be.
It would have to, or apron or cap related. It has to be something like that. I don't know if you just make the money not count or what. Like I think that's an easy way to do it, but they're gonna have to think of some sort of outside of the box way to do it because. Yeah. If they were to try to make it easier to keep your guys, it's just going to have a lot of different ripple effects, and it's going to have ripple effects on free agency and all that stuff too. Yeah. Like if you're a team that just perpetually drafts well, like, do you really need to pick up more than maybe one guy or a couple guys in free agency that aren't just like minimum guys? Like if you're like OKC, you could just keep getting minimum guys to plug in at the bottom, keep drafting well, and keep going. Right. And I think that that's going to have an impact on that market actually in a very big way if teams are just holding on to these roster spots for these guys. So
ultimately, when we go back to CJ McCollum, should teams just be able to keep the players that they draft, period?
Can you designate one guy to have his salary potentially not count fully?
That could be one guy.
Yeah, like say 75% of his deal, just that one guy.
Your designated rookie or something like that.
Yeah, maybe something like that.
That would be interesting.
That'd be interesting.
I'm not totally opposed to
if you drafted that guy. So like Shea wouldn't count, for example, in OKC.
I'll tell you what, if you did something like that, the Mavs are never trading Luka. Even Nico wouldn't have done it.
Nico, he might have still did it.
Nico may have done it anyway. Oh, Nico. What are you doing? Give the guy a cup of coffee and he hands over the keys to the kingdom.
Oh man.
Oh, at least they got Cooper flagged though in Dallas.
Though.
They're gonna be good.
It would count for Cooper.
Yeah, that's right. He would just be going, here you go, Cooper. Here, we'll not count this. Anyway, I'm curious to see what people think in the comment section. CJ McCollum saying that you should be able to keep players as long as you drafted them. What would the ramifications be of setting up some type of system like CJ McCollum seemingly is advocating for, where there are mechanisms to allow players to keep, or allow teams to keep a player as long as they were actually drafted by that team, some sort of incentive without necessarily completely deconstructing the NBA's marketplace and in terms of how we value draft capital and everything moving forward? Or should that be the goal? Should we just do that and burn it down and let's start anew? Should that be an option for the league? But give me your thoughts in the comments down below, everybody. Again, we appreciate all the support that we've gotten here on the Basketball Bulletin. Again, do hit that subscribe button. Till next time, see ya and stay safe.